Ah, balance. In a perfect world, everything is completely even with each other. Paladins are just as good as shamans.
Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt! Lightning bolt!
The Alliance racials are perfectly even with the Hordes, and both factions are on an equal footing. And the only variable in performance is between the keyboard and the computer chair. It's perfect balance. And in the world of RPGs, in my opinion, it's also bad game design. And in this video, I'm going to share my argument why. Even before the game's launch in 2004, players rushed to the forums with tears streaming down their face. God damn it, Blizzard. The reason I just died in PvP isn't because I suck, it's because my class sucks. I mean, what's a warrior to do against a cross mage?
That ability isn't ready yet. Not enough rage.
Why is a class that you can play with a garage door opener soloing me with ease? Also, nerf shamans. Post after post after post. Apparently, every class is incredibly weak, and also incredibly overpowered. Except the one I'm playing, of course. No one understands the depth of knowledge and skill it takes to play my class at my level. I mean, I put so much time and effort into building my character, and this is where the main argument of this video will be based around. RPGs, since their birth, are built around two major features: story and character development. Focusing more on the latter here, leveling, talents, skills, and gear. These are terms that are synonymous with the genre, and the longer you play, the stronger you become. If you forsake this, you forsake the RPG genre as a whole. Now, I will be comparing current World of Warcraft to Classic a lot here, not only because that's what the channel is focused on, but also I think they're just really good examples in general. For Exhibit A, we have Classic. Balance is seldom found in both PvE and PvP, and is pretty much the Wild West. Warriors are the best tanks, priests are the best healers, and in PvP, you'll charge into a fight and die faster than you can say "f*** shamans." Classic is the perfect example of anarchy in terms of balance. And current is the exact opposite. You know those overprotective parents that have bubble wrap on every square inch of their home because their kids keep running into walls? Current is the perfect example of breastfeeding your 30-year-old child. Okay, that was nasty. I apologize. Both have their flaws and strengths, of course, and in an effort of constructiveness, I want to first list off the good sides for both. For Classic, it's the definition of let the kids play. These classes have these abilities, these strengths, and these weaknesses, and the players will obviously find what works and what doesn't. In regards to PvP, it's more of a rock, paper, scissors style, where certain classes have clear advantages over others. Mages counter warriors, but warlocks counter mages, and hunters counter warlocks. In 1v1 PvP, it's a complete mess, but in group objective-oriented PvP, it creates an aspect of strategy of forming an optimal team composition. Druids are of course the best flag carriers, and rogues and hunters are great defenders, paladins good stallers. You're rewarded and punished intensely for building teams certain ways, because all of these classes have their strengths and weaknesses. And not to stick on PvP here too much, in PvE as well, if you're the only one who can provide this buff, or can battle res, or if you're the best tanking class, you're filling a niche, and it feels good. It's not without its downsides, as we'll discuss, but there are some positive things to be drawn from it. But of course, these classes have changed substantially over the past 15 years, and today, that gap of balance has been narrowed. Now, many classes have some sort of speed boost that makes them decent flag carriers, and most classes are capable of stalling because everyone has a big defensive cooldown. Everyone is much more adaptable and versatile, especially with the ease of changing specs and talents on the fly, and that gear adapting with you. Everything is much more flexible and convenient. No longer do you have to rely on only warriors to tank, and priests are no longer the best healers by far for PvE, and so on and so forth. The balance in Classic versus the balance in Current are complete polar opposites, which is why they're such good examples. Ultimately, it's preference of what you like more. Of course, at first glance, most people will likely choose balance over imbalance. I mean, it sounds straightforward enough. but in my opinion, it's more complicated, and you lose important certain aspects that make RPG special. If you take away these things that make the class special by giving it to everyone, like heroism or battle res or buffs, or every healer is pretty good at AoE healing, it makes the classes that excelled at these roles or held these abilities less unique. In this case, it's done mainly to make forming raids easier. Back in BC, you needed that shaman because you needed heroism, and if your shaman wasn't online, well, you're screwed. But again, on the flip side, one can make the argument that forming a proper composition and recruiting can also be considered a skill. Obviously, it can get out of hand, and you don't want it to be a situation where you stack 90% of the same class, but it's still a legitimate tactical element that I think is diminished when you start creating these items that give hallmark class abilities to everyone, or every class being adaptable to any circumstance. Another great example is the PvP skilling in Current. Now, I don't pretend by any means to be an expert in anything PvP related in Current. Cataclysm was really the last expansion where I enjoyed it personally, but it's nearly unrecognizable today. When you zone in, your stats are scaled differently, and you don't even do the damage that you think you're dealing.
Alright, wait, watch this again. Ready, chat? 73,000 hit points. I hit him for 189k, he doesn't die.
In an effort to balance things out, if you're a higher eye level player, your damage is actually scaled down if you're attacking a lower eye level player. For example, you hit the lower eye level person for 50,000, he'll take 25,000 on his screen. You're still stronger, but overall that gap is shortened. It's done to balance the game because it's just not fair for the fresh player. Except that it is fair. It's the very definition of the word fair, in fact, that the player who spends more time in the game should have an overwhelming advantage to a character who just hit the max level. It's unfair to artificially shorten this gap for the sake of balance. It's anti-competitive, and it's anti-character progression in a genre that's centered around character progression. Giving the Detroit Lions a 50-point handicap every game doesn't make things fair. If you're a fresh max level and you zone into an arena and expect anything other being made to be somebody's girlfriend, the problem is with you and not the game. It's so indirect and micromanaged. You do arena and your stats are scaled all over the place, and trinket effects are nerfed, trait effects are nerfed, abilities deal more or less damage. Nothing is what it seems. You're not even dealing the damage you think you're dealing. Let me ask you a simple question. What happened to building and gearing your character, and then zoning in with all of your correct stats, and when you deal 100 damage, the enemy takes 100 damage? What's the next expansion? Every time you use an ability, you have to make a customer service ticket and ask if it's okay? The best way to describe PvP in Current is it's one of those Mad Catz controllers with 10 extra buttons and joysticks. Half of them stick, the joystick has you permanently coasting to the left, and this is the piece of crap your friend hands to you when you're over at their house. It's like, why can't I use that controller? Because screw you, that's why. Look at all the great features this one has. As I mentioned, loot is a huge part of character development and balance. I touched on this in my old BFA review, but I still think it's worth exploring more because I think it's one of the biggest issues with the current game, and it's not really talked about too much. The loot in Current is the perfect example of when balance and homogenization is taken way, way too far. What's this piece? Main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2. What about this one? Main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2. And this one? Main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2. World quests, dungeons, raids, warfronts, PvP, invasions, caches, emissaries. It doesn't matter. Main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2 on every single piece. I swear, and the closest thing we have to George Orwell's 1984 is the loot system in current World of Warcraft. It's almost as depressing as my voice. One of the things I like with Classic, and just RPGs in general, is the variety in loot. Some of it sucks, some of it's okay, and some of it is, oh my god, I will sacrifice my left testicle for this. The one thing they all share in common though, is that they're unique. Each piece is different from the last. How so? Well, there are way more stats first off. You have hit, Crit, spirit, weapon skill, spell penetration, resistances, plus damage, plus healing, thorns, tier sets, and many more. It's before the age of ultra-homogenization. Different weapon types matter because of weapon skill, racials, and talents, and the speeds can be different, which is very important. The slower the better because ability damage is usually based around weapon damage, and ultimately with the way that stats are allocated, there are good items and there are bad items. Some are garbage for PvE and amazing in PvP. These two items drop from the same raid. One is complete garbage, and the other one you use for the rest of the game. It's unbalanced. I have a friend named Los, who I get into nerd debates between current and classic all the time, and I had a good gotcha moment with him. He played the original back in 04 to 07, and he was one of the officers in my guild. He played a rogue and sticked with the game pretty steadily over the years, playing most expansions a good bit, and when Classic came out, he didn't have any interest in it because he just didn't want to go back to it again. But one day, I was having a chat with another friend who actually did pick up Classic, and Los jumped in the channel. We were talking about our Onyxia raid that day, and we were talking about what loot was going to drop, and one of us mentioned Viscage, and Los chimed in and reminisced. He was like, "Oh yeah, Viscage. That's the Onyxia drop. It's the blue and red recolor of the Dalren set. I remember that was amazing back in the day, and it had that damage proc. Every rogue wanted one." So here's a guy who hasn't touched Classic in 15 years. He never played private servers, he doesn't keep up with Classic or any aspect of it. His Classic experience started in 2004 and ended in 2007, and yet still, he remembers this weapon from 15 years ago, down to the proc effect, because, well, it's memorable. At this point, we both still rated in current, and he happened to get a dagger drop just a day or two before this. I asked him the name of the weapon he got, and he could not answer me. Why? Well, aside from maybe his age getting the best of him, it's because the loot in current is so generic and forgettable that it doesn't matter. What's the difference between this and the other 20 carbon copies that you get from dungeons, or world quests, or loot caches? This guy can remember a one-handed sword in a game he hadn't played in 15 years, and he couldn't remember the name of the dagger he got 2 days ago. There's no gravity to 90% of your equipment anymore because uniqueness and fun has been balanced out of it. We don't want people to feel like they need this weapon type and ignore all the rest, so we'll go ahead and make them all the same. We don't want people to ignore these fast weapons, so we'll just make them all have the same speed. And we don't want people to choose between different types of gems and match socket bonuses or pick a meta gem, so just remove it all and make all gems match all sockets. We don't want players to make a decision to break tier set bonuses when getting the new set, so we're just going to remove tier sets. Blizzard just seems so deathly afraid of the player having to make a decision. The player no longer adapts to the game now adapts to the player. Items that you get from the literal Old God of the Deep, the final boss of the expansion, are essentially the same as the ones you get from a generic soloable world quest. And when Titan Forging and the corruption systems were in the game, it could be just as good. As far as I know though, that's going away in Shadowlands, which is an improvement, so you gotta give them credit there. It has negative effects in other ways too. Because the loot is all over the place in Classic, there are some amazing pieces even in the early raid tiers such as Molten Core, and even when the final raid, Nexramas, is out, players still have a reason to go to the Molten Core. This adds replayability in a way that, in my opinion, is more healthy and natural for the game. It seems to me that current relies on replayability in forced and awkward methods such as artifact-powered dailies or daily quest hubs, or the other 20 things with daily or weekly timers arbitrarily tacked onto them. Another problem I have with the game is a monumental amount of daily chores that it sets you on. A lot of the times, it feels like you're forced into this mindless routine of grinding out dailies to feed into engagement metrics rather than actually playing the game. Plus, it's just a huge waste of development resources. Raiding in current is amazing. The boss fights are great, and they're at their peak in my opinion. I always maintain that as far as mechanics and boss design is concerned, they do a great job, so to completely abandon raid tiers as soon as the next one releases just seems like a big waste. To me, raiding is the mainstay endgame activity for nearly every MMO in existence, so having replayability tied to that, in my opinion, feels much more natural and fun than helping the turtles make it to the water for the 10,000th time.
A turtle made it to the water.
Don't get me wrong, they're both repetitive, but that's the name of the game for MMOs. I'm just saying that raiding feels more like you're actually playing the game, and daily quests and all this busy work just sort of fills the time while you wait for your next raid to reset. Just look at Classic. It's a 15-year-old game, and it's as basic as it gets. Your weekly itinerary isn't grinding Azurite, or daily reputation hubs, or world quests. It's doing raids that are as easy as your mom, and yet still, it's a juggernaut because that's what the whole MMORPG genre is all about. The main point I'm getting at here, though, is that this is all tied to loot. The reason why these raid tiers are immediately abandoned is because the loot is so simple, everything is replaced. If everything is main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2 in raid A, and then everything is main stat, stamina, secondary 1, secondary 2, but just a little bit higher in raid B, why would you ever go back to raid A? I swear that Blizzard would balance chess if given the chance. You know, we've read that the pawn piece is a little undertuned, and it isn't as versatile as the other pieces, so we're giving them the ability to move in straight and diagonal directions unlimited just like the queen. And it's the same with the knight. Now, they can move to other places that other pieces can't, but we don't want players having to choose between moving their queen and moving their knight, so we're just going to make the knight the same as the queen too. It makes sense for certain genres. I think FPS games are a great example. If two players are using the same gun, they better have the same fire rate, recoil, and bloom as each other, and the person with the better reaction time and aim should win, because that's where the genre shines. Great gunplay, individual player skill, and of course teamwork. Got it right, Crooked. Right. Thanks for the AA.
Damn it, you're a fucking shitbag.
However, forcing the same balance on an RPG, something that's so reliant on character progression and customization, is like trying to fit a square peg through a round hole. All you end up with is a messed up peg and a messed up hole, and that's no fun for anyone. I think the game would benefit from a respite of all of the fun being balanced out of everything. You can sum up this 20-minute video to Let the Kids Play. This 15-year-old game, where one class globals literally any other class every 3 minutes, and has a loot system that's all over the place, is thriving. I think it's okay for the enemy to take the actual damage you're dealing to them, and I think it's okay to have more than 4 stats, or have some classes that excel in some areas and suck in others. Like I said at the start of the video, neither ends of the spectrum are perfect. The only difference is that Classic is a 15-year-old game with a community who doxes each other for suggesting guild banks, so I don't want to know what'll happen if Blizzard actually changes balance. Both have gaping flaws, and the best would be a mix of the two in my opinion. Would it be ironic to say that the best balance would be a balance between the two? I get kind of ranty with Current these days if you haven't noticed, but hopefully it comes from a place of constructiveness. The frustrations and changes I shared in this video, I ultimately feel would improve the game. The success of Classic shows that there's value in the game resembling more of an RPG. I'm not saying to go as far as mimicking it completely or pretending it's flawless, just that there's a demand in the player adapting to the game instead of the game adapting to the player. I'm well aware that I've talked about this stuff before, but it needs to be said. These are issues that I feel kill the game, and as long as I continue to care about it, I'll keep bringing it up. Titan forging would still be in the game if people didn't speak up about it. But hey, take it for what it is. At the end of the day, it's just another neckbeard's opinion.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.